Welcome, I'm Nina Griffin, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel. Today, I'm going to start a new series called the Astrological Magic series, where I'll discuss certain points of astrological magic that I think are important for both students and developing astro mages, and simply discuss them and give you some advice and perhaps opinions on how to progress and how to develop your practice for what I think are the best results. First off, I wanted to say thank you very much to all of my patrons. I appreciate all of your support. If you would like to get access to astrological magic videos early as well as exclusively, you can go to patreon.com/Nina Griffin. You can also get at the highest tier access to my monthly ebook called Magical Elections, which shows you how to make planetary talismans, as well as every month the best times and dates for said planetary talismans. Today, I wanted to talk to you about the different things that we can get from astrological magic. Sometimes it's easy to start off on a particular path and perhaps get locked into thinking that this is really the only possible use. But astrological magic is a huge field, and there's so much that we can do with it. It's really just limited by our own imaginations. There are really two main veins that you can pursue. One, and I think this is the most common one, it's certainly the one that I think attracts the most people to astrological magic as a field, is what I call the material benefit element or the material benefit path. And this is simply using astrological magic, using planetary talismans to improve your life, usually in fairly tangible manner. So for example, it's about finding a new job, a better paying job, or one that you get along better with your boss or what have you. But you can also use it for somewhat less tangible things, but certainly still things that are intended to improve your external life. And so this could be, for example, finding a new relationship, or it could be something a little bit more like self-improvement. You want to stop smoking or something like that, and you want some magical support on that path. So the sky is the limit. And, before I think I get too deeply into some of the other options out there, I want to make sure that you realize there is not a negative judgment attached to this path. It's certainly how I got interested in astrological magic. And I think it's a very constructive way to get into it, because most of us, being modern people, even if we won't believe or want to believe that magic works, I think it's a very different experience than actually making a talisman and having it produce results. And the best way to do that when starting out is to ask for something material, something concrete, something where you can see that there has been a positive change in your life. So I think I do encourage people to walk this path as long as it's comfortable for them. It's something you can do all your life, and you don't have to choose one particular direction over another. But it's important to recognize that it's not the only path forward. So one of the things that also is important to recognize is that on this particular path, you may find at times you'll ask for things that you may get them, and you probably will get them, especially if you get kind of any good at this, but they may not be so good for you. And it's not that they're going to mess up your life forever. It's just that when you look back, sometimes, just like in all the stories about wish fulfillment, about the magic genie or whatever that brings you 3 wishes, it will happen that you'll get something that really wasn't going to be an improvement in your life. And I think this happens to most people at some point. Certainly if you're asking for things in a very mature and thoughtful way, it's much less likely to happen. But there is an element of exploration. There is a certain learning process, a learning curve that happens not just on the magical side, but on the side of just learning about yourself and learning about what you really want. I think that in many ways is half the magic, if you will. So sometimes, again, you may get things that you realize you didn't really want or need. And that's okay, because that is also part of the growth process, right? You're going to learn, you realize, okay, maybe I didn't need this particular thing. This is not something that really resonates with me. It didn't get fulfilled in the way that I had hoped. Whatever it may be, it's okay. It's part of a learning curve. What that means, though, it tends to make your journey, I would say, to growth a little bit more circuitous, a bit more windy, right? It's not a direct path from A to B, and that's okay. I think that in many ways, that's how life often is. The other path, and this is something that doesn't really get a lot of mention in today's astrological magic community, is more, I would say, philosophical. And I call it philosophical because it's beautifully described by the philosopher Iamblichus in his book On the Mysteries. This is a book that I teach extensively in my magical elections class because in it he lays out beautifully so much of the underlying philosophy of astrology, of magic, of religion, of all of these ways to try to connect with the higher forces in the universe. One of the important parts of Iamblichus's thought is that he, of course, looks down on material magic entirely, but it's okay. He's a philosopher, he's much more exalted than the rest of us. But he's right in one point, I think, which is that it's important to always keep your eyes on the highest goal, which is the whole point of astrological magic is to commune with the gods. And the reason we commune with the gods is manifold, and he gives you a lot of different philosophical reasons for why it's good. But we generally want to commune with them because their very presence is healing and beneficial to us on a spiritual level. You may not necessarily walk away, more beautiful, more popular, and wealthier from encounters with the gods. That's not necessarily what it's about, although perhaps you may get some material benefit. But the main goal of such encounters, which happen in the astrological magical ritual space, the point of these encounters is that you yourself are gradually attuned to these higher vibrations, if you will. That is not a term that he uses. That's a very 20th century term. But I think it's one that we can all understand, is that by being in the presence of a god, you gradually start to take on some of their finer energy, right? So it sort of elevates our souls from more terrestrial concerns into more heavenly and elevated ways of thinking and of existing. So this is the other thing that you can do with astrological magic. Every time you do a ritual, you don't have to ask for something, right? You don't have to ask for a particular benefit to yourself, unless, of course, you could do one for kind of like the whole world. It could be very non-selfish if you prefer. But generally, astrological magical ritual, in that philosophical sense, is primarily about invoking the gods and creating a sacred space where you can commune with them and where you can partake of their energy to gradually transform yourself and to elevate yourself. And I mentioned this path not because it's necessarily better, although I think it's a path where a lot of people just anecdotally seem to end up, even if they start out being more interested in material things. But I mention it so that you know what maybe the final goal is, or that it just exists, right? One of the things that I've noticed a number of people have told me about is that after a number of years practicing astrological magic for usually more mundane things, they end up not wanting so many things. And one theory is that's because the astrological magic has helped you get your life to a decent place where you may not have so many unfulfilled desires, right? What you wanted, you mostly got. However, another way to think about it, and this is maybe a theory that I tend to more favor, is that I think you become a person who simply is not so buffeted back and forth by their desires. Remember that in Greek philosophy, I'm sure you've heard of the concept of the golden mean. And the idea of the golden mean is not to be too extreme. And one of the ways that the ancient Greek philosophers, that they really emphasized this was by not having excessive emotions, because excessive emotions, whether they're desire or fear or anger or whatever, that's what gets you into trouble, not only with other people, but also with yourself, because excessive emotions and their intensity are something that primarily exists in the physical world. And so it's very difficult if you have those kinds of feelings all the time to get elevated into the unchanging and serene realms of the gods, which is, of course, from that philosophical perspective, that's the goal of every soul, is to come back to the heavenly spheres. But, you have to kind of earn your way out. So I do think that doing astrological magic over a number of years does seem to contribute to growth, to personal growth. And that can happen if you've just done material magic, or whether it's more esoterically or a more divine orientation there. It seems to do something for people that's quite positive, and that indicates some kind of growth, some kind of balancing seems to have taken place. I would say very simply that people do seem to get a little bit less attached to their physical whether it's comforts or relationships or just their physical life. There is this understanding, perhaps, that comes at a deep soul level over time that one doesn't really need all of these things to be just so in order to be happy, and that happiness comes from something else than having all of your material needs and wants perfectly catered to at all times. So those are kind of the two main directions that you can take. There's another way or another path that to me is sort of a combination of these two, and that is worth mentioning. Sometimes there is a small group of people who I think are interested in astrological magic, but they don't want to ask for things for themselves for a number of reasons. Sometimes it's an issue of self-esteem. Other times they're simply just very kind and selfless people who don't feel like they want things. They're already, I would say, probably somewhat more evolved than many of us. And what I always suggest is if you're still intrigued by astrological magic, you can, of course, go the spiritual path, right? You can just commune with whatever god or goddess you are invoking. So, the energy of Venus and Aphrodite, or the energy of Mars and Aries, and so on. But you can also do kind of a combination where you're asking for something good, but either for a specific another person, where you can help someone else who you think is struggling, a family member or a friend, and you can do something on their behalf. Those, I think, are very powerful workings. Again, anecdotally, I've had students who did this as part of their assignment for my magical elections class, and often their results were just spectacular. I think partly because they were doing it from a place of love and concern, and I think that was really reflected in their results. The other thing you can do is you can simply do things for the planet and for humanity. If you want to think even bigger than just individual people you can do a working for a group of people, you can do work like a family, you can do a working for, again, all of humanity. We can certainly use it. And so if you're wanting to bring some kind of positive energy into manifestation in the world, why wouldn't you use astrological magic to make that happen? So these are some of the paths and some of the ideas that I hope you can use when you're looking at magical elections. So for example, if you look at my monthly magical elections and you see a talisman there for, let's say, Venus in Taurus, again, you can use some of the more material goals, which is usually what I list, since that's what most people are interested in. But don't forget that you can do other Venusian benefits as well, right? You can simply use this to commune with the ideal of beauty, or commune with perfect love, so that is once, becomes a part of you as well. So there's just a lot that you can do that isn't necessarily listed, but there are a lot of what I would call off-label uses of the planets that have these larger and, I would say, more elevated applications. If you have any questions, of course, you're always welcome to contact me or just drop a comment below. Of course, I think you should subscribe because this is, I'm hoping, going to be a series. And so there should be a series of videos here that are going to be about astrological magic from the perspective of someone like me who's both a practitioner, who's taught it quite a bit, and who's also very interested in the philosophy and theory underpinning astrological magic. All right, thanks for watching. I'm Nina Griffin, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel.